because even though we did go into specifics with Acts, and we did group Acts into the first part with Peter and the second part with Paul, it is a lot better to group things so we can better understand them. And if you have to reference something, you know where to go to. So as we continue in the 14 epistles, we're grouping the 14 epistles together because they're all written by Paul to certain churches and to talk about certain problems within the church, or generally when we talk about Romans, you'll see a better understanding of it. And so today we're going to be covering the first three epistles: Romans, First and Second Corinthians. Right. So when we talk about this, the best thing to understand when we talk about epistles is first who wrote it, second to whom it was written to, and why it was written. Those are very important because two people can write a literary work which are almost exactly the same, but depending on who they write to is going to be different, right? The writing method is different, and who they write to affects what they write and what the surrounding and what the problem they are talking about also affects what they write. So we're not going to spend too much talking about who wrote it because that's what we looked at Book of Acts. Book of Acts, we talked a lot about Paul and how he became a missionary worker, how he became a follower of God, and how he his life and his early life and how he changed and all that. So since we understand that he wrote it, we don't really need to focus on who wrote it because we already talked about that in the Book of Acts. So now, within, like I said, we're going to group things within the 14 epistles as well. And the grouping method we're going to use is in three parts, like a paragraph or essay you write, is an intro, body, and conclusion. Now, within the intro, within the first few chapters, he talks mainly about, he talks to them on a personal way, and he affirms his faith. Basically, he talks about the faith that they share. He talks about how they are together in a certain belief, and how he even prays in some of them, and even uses the Old Testament in some to show that they are one in faith, and he affirms his faith in the introduction, right? And we're going to see that in the first few books we're going to look at today. And then in the body, he addresses the issue. The issue, he was writing these epistles, letters, because there's an issue that he needs to address. And we said that these epistles were written throughout his life from the first, I don't think he wrote any in the first mission, but from the second mission on, he's writing epistles throughout when we were talking about Acts, how he was going through second mission, third mission, he got in prison, all that. Throughout that, he's writing letters to people, right? So that's and he's getting addressed. They're telling they have issues. We have this, we have that, and he hears something, so he writes to them saying, "This is how you fix it. This is how it should be," right? And then finally, the conclusion usually says either he's gonna visit them, or that they should stay strong. That they should not fear anything. That they should stay with what he taught them and what they know to be true. And he warns them, people are going to come say this, say that, but he says you need to be strong, and that's how he finishes off most of the epistles, right? So when we talk about the first book in the epistle is Romans, right? Book of Romans, and Rome is very important in the Christian, as Christianity spread, Rome is important because at the time Rome was everything. It was like the capital of the world almost, because at the time Rome had everything. It conquered everybody. Everybody was either literally under them or somehow, when he covered it with the, although some of them weren't enslaved specifically, being or anything like that, they were under their rule. So talking to Rome is very important because it spreads because Rome has a great influence on the rest of the world. Now, Romans is kind of different because it talks a lot about theological views. it talks a lot about God and what they need to do, and very we'll see examples in a little bit, but just know that it is very theological. And he didn't visit Romans yet. Romans was one of the places that he didn't yet visit, and is now writing to them, right? So even at the end, he tells them that I will come and I will visit you. So when he wrote this, it's not like one very specific. There's one specific problem that he addresses, but he also generally addresses other things. But we're gonna look at one thing that's gonna be a continuation even from Acts. That was a problem in Acts when we talk about the first. You guys remember the first meeting they had in the book of Acts, chapter 9, I want to say, when Peter stood up and said something. The first what was the word you used? Sorry, the first council. Yeah. Then the first council, something arose. There was a problem that they had to address, and that problem continues on into this book. And Romans is very important because it is directly connected to our faith. It is directly connected to our faith, and the book of Romans talks about our faith very in depth, and it is very it is a book filled with like conviction. Like if you guys seen a poem, well, I'm not gonna get into that, but he says people read Psalms because they can't stand the conviction in Romans. Like Romans is gonna tell you what you're doing wrong. It's not like gonna playfully, oh, it's okay, do this, do that. Like no, if you're doing this, you're going to hell or you're gonna die. That's what it says, right? And that people don't want to read that because, well, people rather be comforted than just being told they're wrong and how to fix it. Even though it tells you how to fix it, people start it out and they get scared and they're just like, nah, I'd rather stick to Psalms, right? So it is it's even, correct me if I'm wrong, it's even nicknamed the Cathedral of our Faith. That's one of its nicknames, right? And a lot of people know, a lot of church know it as that. And because we have to understand how important faith is in our lives. Not just in religion, faith in other people, faith in that you can do what you can do. And that sounds a bit stupid, but knowing that you can do something without actually having proof that you can, it goes in a long way. Like faith is basically believing in something that doesn't have either any proof or like incomplete proof, right? That's what faith means. But if we're gonna do things that are 100% proof, like we're not risking anything, we're not doing anything purposeful, and we're not venturing out to like what we can do, right? So we have to we have to apply this to all aspects of our life, not just our faith, and that's very important when we talk about Rome, or the book of Romans. Excuse me. So now you guys remember I said something about the council. Who remembers what actually happened? Who remembers what the problem was that they had to address? I'm gonna be on the quiz, so test actually.
Is it division?
Huh?
Is it division?
Division because of what? Something happened
Is it
to.
what the nature is? Or
No. It's not like huge problem as in like it's not a theological argument. Well, it kind of is, but like it is based on something physical that they think they had to do. Okay, what's the opposite of faith?
Work.
No.
Work, right? Well, yeah. Go Wes. I don't think she was even here. She whispered it. I don't know. She said circumcision, right? And we learned that in the book of Acts, there was a person, when Paul went back to Jerusalem, he heard somebody teaching that you will be saved by circumcision alone. Right? He was teaching that if you are circumcised, you will be saved. That's what he was teaching. And Paul and everybody that was there were outraged because that's not how you do it. Because even though we'll talk about that in a little bit, because that problem was huge because it kind of continues not kind of, it continues to Rome, right? Bless you. And like it has a huge problem in Rome. It caused a huge problem because a lot of people started believing that through action they can be saved. Through circumcision they can be saved. Through what they can do physically they can be saved. That is a pathway you don't want to go down, right? That's huge because, well, let's first talk about the introduction, right? In the first couple of chapters, there's a key verse I wanted to look at. In the first chapter of the book of Romans, verse 16 through 17, it says, For I am not ashamed of this good news about Christ. What's the good news? Those are the Gospels, right? You said Gospels are the good news. He said he's not ashamed of it. He said he's not ashamed of it, and we can't be as well. A lot of people, well, I'm gonna talk about that. So, it says, "For I am not ashamed of this good news about Christ. It is the power of God at work, saving everyone who believes." This good news tells us how God makes us right in His sight. How God what? Makes us right. This is accomplished from the start to finish by faith. And as the scriptures say, it is through faith that a righteous person has life. Right? Starting out, he's talking about faith and how important it is. Right? Now, everybody in Rome believes that it is through action alone that they need to they are going to be saved. Right? And he's directly addressing this. He's saying it's not. He said it's not your action. He says, I am not ashamed of the good news, to start off, right? How many of us are willing to say something, like are willing to speak up? Not just, well, like, let's just generally work. Like, let's talk about work or school, whichever one for those who don't work. Think about school. Let's say you're in a class or at work that somebody, like, not directly attacking your religion, but says something, and I know you guys have experienced, says something that you don't believe in, and says it or makes fun of something you believe in. And I've experienced this in my class, in my psychology class, and not actually psychology. Psychology was okay. In my philosophy, right? Philosophy class. I love that class. I really loved it. But we start talking about very theological methods, and he assumed almost everybody was atheist. He assumed that when he was talking, and then, like, thankfully, I had some background. I had some knowledge of what my belief is, so I can say something, right? Whenever I was asked, I actually said something. But I never really volunteered to, like, tell about my faith. I never talked about my faith. And it's hard for people to believe in faith because people need something, like, firm. I need, like, show me proof and I'll believe. That's what people say. And science is all about probabilities and all that. And they're like, is that really probable? Right? So a leap of faith is necessary because we are required to believe in something that is outside our five senses, that's outside our knowledge. It's not like God is not something we can comprehend. We talked about mysteries, right? 5 pillars of mysteries. It's not called a mystery because we can easily know it. It's a mystery because it's hard to understand. It's a mystery because it's a leap of faith. It's a mystery because somebody has to reveal it to you. And that's God. So we can't be ashamed. Like he says, I am not ashamed. That's how he starts. I am not ashamed of the good news. And we can't be ashamed that when we say somebody rose from the dead. It's like you believe somebody actually died and came back to life. Like, yes, we have to be able to say that. We can't be ashamed of saying that. So and then he continues to say, it is through faith that the righteous person has life. How I want to look at it is, we always say God didn't come for the righteous, but for the sinful, right? But even the righteous, it's saying even the righteous would not have life without faith. Even the righteous don't need to come to, like if you're righteous, you don't need to come to church. But you need faith. And faith is huge. It says how everyone should receive faith. It says in Romans chapter 6, verse 5, it says, since we have been united with him in his death, we will also be raised to life as he was. That's faith gives us that. Faith gives us ways to be one with God. Through faith, we are one with God. We suffer with him. We are crucified with him. We die with him. But the best part is, we resurrect with him. And Paul is a great example of that. Paul, died, as in not physically, but all his beliefs were shattered when he was blinded. Everything that he wasn't anymore. Everything he believed, he didn't anymore. He was reborn with Christ. He said, when he sent somebody to give him his sight back, he gave him a new life. He became one with God because of his faith. And immediately what did he do? He went out and starts preaching. That's what he did. And this faith gives us this. And there are many verses, I can list them to you right now, but that's not important, because what I need you guys to know is that faith gives us ways of being one with God. And faith is by far one of the most important things. But when we say this, when Paul says all this, it looks like he's saying it's not by works that you are saved, it is by faith. Right? He's saying, now he sounds like he's saying it is by faith alone that you are saved. Right? But this is why it's important to understand to whom he's writing and what the context is. If somebody comes to you and says, I'm not gonna go into it. I just blanked out of it. But what I want you guys to focus is that these people say, through works you will be saved. Through work, you will have eternal life. And that's almost blasphemous. Right?
Only.
Huh? Oh yeah. Through work alone, through works alone, through what you do alone, you will be saved. And now Paul is talking to them because they say that. He says, through faith you will be saved. Through faith you will be saved. And he tells them, since Adam, from Adam until Christ, we have been doing what? Sinning. But at the same time, everybody has been trying to get to heaven. Have been trying to, through the Mosaic laws, through all these sacrifices, all these different things, they have been trying to get to heaven. Everybody. Right? Everybody's been trying to get to heaven. Not one person got there. If you guys think that through works alone you can get there, don't you think from Abraham until Jesus somebody would have done it? If it's something we can do, there's nothing that I can do that Abraham didn't do. There's think of how these are the four fathers of our faith. What can we do that they can't? They didn't, and even that wasn't enough. So, us thinking that we can actually do something, us thinking that we come here, give some money, and leave, or go to a charity event and give some money and leave, and just having that way of thinking that what you do will actually get you to heaven is a terrible mistake. Not even you can be the most forgiving, the most selfless person, but if you think that will save you, it won't. And he addresses it. And in chapter 3, verse 23, it says, "For everyone has sinned, we all fall short of God's glory and standards." everybody what?
Sin.
Sins, and we all fall short. He didn't say everybody except the person that gives $1 million. That's not what he said. Everybody falls short. Everybody. And because of that, we have to talk about faith. And if we fail to do that, he talks about punishments. That's why Book of Romans, everybody doesn't really like it. Because he says, usually people, like the books say, do this and do that. And we kind of already know the punishment, so they don't really have to say it, right? But in in the Book of Romans, if we go to chapter 6, verse 23, it says, for the wages of sin is death. For the wages of sin is what? First it says, everybody sins. Right? He says, not one person is outside.
What was that?
The first one or the second one? Second one is chapter 6, verse 23. So first he says, everybody falls short. Everybody. If you try to do it on your own, you're going to fall short. Second, it says, if you fall short, the punishment is death. But if we actually finish that verse, this is what it says. For the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord. He tells you what the punishment is, and he tells you how to escape it. That's amazing to me. He tells you you're guilty, you have like life in prison or like death, that's what he says. You have death, like you have to pay it in death, but if you just do this, you're good. You don't have to really die. So the steps he takes are amazing. And if they still think that through action alone we are saved, he's telling them you're terribly mistaken. So knowing that, we have to we can save ourselves through faith, right? And we can save ourselves through Christ. But through Christ, there's a story I forgot. I don't want to go into too much specifics. Where there's a man. Let me just forget that. I'm gonna just tell you a scenario, right? Let's say you're walking down the road. You see a homeless person, right? You see a homeless person, and you have a lot of money. You give the homeless person like $100, right? I was like, what? $100, right? But you don't really care. It's because you have like a lot of money. You just give it to them and you walk away, right? They're so grateful, but you don't really care because you're doing it because you have a lot of money. That's your actions, right? Do you think you're going to be saved because you did that? Because you gave somebody $100? Now let's think of it the other way. Where you're walking down the road, you have money, and you see, like they ask you, please, can I get some money? I'm hungry, right? And you say, I believe you can get some food. I have faith that you're going to get better. I have faith you're going to have a family. I have faith that you're going to get rich. Is that going to help the person at all? That's not going to help him. So, first scenario, you did something, you're not saved. Second scenario, you didn't actually do anything, you had faith, the person doesn't get saved. Right? Now let's combine the two. You go down the street, you meet somebody, and they're poor, they have nothing. You have money. And you feel like if you give them the money, that's the startup they need to become better, a better person. They can eat. You can save a life. And for that reason, you give them the money. Which one is the best out of those three scenarios?
Third one.
Clearly, it's the third one, right? So that's what he's trying to say. He talks about how we have to put them together. Faith is amazing. Faith is amazing. And we can do a lot by faith. But when we put them together, it's the best scenario that we can possibly have. Bless you. Now, it talks about. Hold on, let me go to the verse. Okay, so when we try to get into the finishing parts of Rome, the book of Romans, it keeps talking about how our faith is amazing, how our faith does a lot for us, right? And for some, it is good. For some, it is the motivation we need to serve. It is the motivation that we like. David and I were just talking. We weren't talking. He just mentioned it briefly. I was talking about how my sister is always like focused, right, in regards to school and whatnot, and I am not, right. Like, he was like, we were talking about her, how smart she is, right, and he says, why is she so much smarter than you? I was like, she's not smarter than me. She's just more focused, right, and. Because she's definitely not smarter than me. I swear. She's not smarter than me. She's just more focused. We have let's say this light, right? This light, it illuminates everybody, right? It illuminates everybody in here. And it's actually only one. Wow, I thought that was more than one. It's only one, right? So there's a huge amount of light coming out of it to illuminate everybody, right? But if we have one little bit of laser, and we point it at something directly, what is it gonna do? Like if it's a strong laser, it can even like burn through papers, right? That's what. But does the laser have more light or less light? It has less light. It has way less light, right? But it is focused. It is like in comparison. It is this much light the laser has, and there's actually like a research to about, I would say, like almost 3 to 4 times the what the fluorescent has, right? So when light is focused, it can burn through things. Not even a lot of it, very little amount. She's definitely not smarter than me. She's less smart. She's focused more than me. Therefore, she's doing more than me. Right? And we're talking about how she she's in senior year, and she's like, she already applied to every college. She had interviews with a whole bunch of them and all that. I'm not going to tell her business, but yeah, she's getting it, right? So, and I didn't have that because I'm not focused. And then what Dawi said was, but you're focused about church, right? I was like, yeah, he's actually right. So if we have the right motivation, if we have the right faith, if we combine that with our works, and all of them come together, we're going to be focused. We're going to be attacking someone, burning through papers, and fixing our problems like Paul was. That's what we need to do. That's what we have to do, and that's what Paul continues on doing through Corinthians and the rest of the epistles. Now, throughout, that's going to be, that's pretty much the end of the book of Romans, where he tells them once he's saved, once everything is good, he says, I'll come and visit you, right? Because he hasn't visited Rome yet. Whereas other epistles, he actually even established the church. He actually was there when it got started. So that's very important. So now the book of Corinthians, it also talks, it's a continuation. And so the book of Corinthians, the first one, I told you guys last week, I think, how all of them have a specific theme, a specific subject that he attacks and tries to, not attacks, but you know what I mean, that he focuses on and tries to change people on. And the First Corinthians, that thing is corruption, right? It is corruption. People start saying things. People start doing things, and we can learn a lot from that. If you have a chance to read it, read 1 Corinthians, because because there's so many religions now, there's only one church, but there's like many people claiming to be that's the only religion. Because of that, we face trials and tribulations. We face our young generation going to different places, not just because there are other churches, because we don't have substantial. We have plenty of stuff, but like we don't. It's not accessible easily. And we have to talk about that because like you can't get online and find all these like the things I had to do to talk about these things. What was the name of the books that you told me to look up? Andumta, right? I even forgot the title. That's bad. But like those are not easily accessible, right? Those are not easily accessible. And making things easily accessible is one of the best things because like even when you're bored, if you take a look at it, you might get a couple verses in, and that might be the thing that inspires you, the thing that makes you focus and like not convert you, but brings you back to your first love, right? So the first thing, the thing he focuses on in corruption. You forget? Oh, you didn't hear the joke? You missed out, bro. Alright, so okay, so in the First Corinthians, there's a lot of corruption. People start preaching, and they even say terrible like lies, like they're better than Paul even. And huh? All right. Okay, so correction. It is the first one is division, right?
Division is sin.
Huh?
Division is sin.
Yeah, in the sin. So when we talk about division and sin, let's go to a verse. It says, chapter 3, verse 16. But on Judgment Day, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The fire will show if a person's work has any value. What does the fire do? Yeah, if your works has anything, like if it has any value, right? Any importance. What you're gonna be, we're gonna be judged, not just biblically, but in our day-to-day life, if what you do has value, right? If you say you go to school, does that have value to your life? Or are you just going to school just to go to school? You say you go to work, right? Are you there just to make money, or are you there to improve yourself? Are you gonna just stay where you're at, or are you gonna try and be focused and continue on into the next level, I guess you can say. So it's very important because we're going to be judged. And judgment it says not to judge, but we judge every day. And sometimes it's stupid not to judge. Like if you see a guy with a gun, now I'm not going to judge. No, that's stupid. You got it. There's a difference between judging somebody for their outlooks and judging for somebody for what they don't know, right? And it talks about that because it says in this book that people that have the law will be judged by the law. People that don't have the law will be judged apart from the law. Because we can't judge somebody for what they don't know, right? But he goes on to say, he says, it is like people that, even in the Gospels, how Thomas, Doubting Thomas. You guys remember the story of Doubting Thomas? How everybody told him that Christ is risen. He says, I'm not going to believe it until I see it. He didn't have faith. Right? So everything's connected. We have to be able to make that connection. So we have to have, and he says, Christ says, if you want to touch it, here, touch it. Like the whole. I have risen, and this is me right now, right? And he says, you have seen me and you have believed. If you see something and you believe it, that's not amazing. If you see somebody flying and I ask you, can somebody fly? You say yes, and you're not gonna be like crazily amazed. Well, you will be, but like you won't have a doubt because you've seen it, right? But he says, "Blessed are those who don't see and yet still believe." That's faith, and it says you're blessed for that. So, and it talks about how people are committing adultery and terrible sins like homosexuality and all that, right? And it's not. I'm not gonna just skip by it, but I'm just gonna generally talk about what he said, and I'm gonna talk about it, and without like mainly focusing on each verse. But we have to understand. It says that our body is the temple of God, right? Our body is what, like, the difference. There are three types of churches, right? There's a church, the actual church. There's church, the community church, and church, our body, right? And our body is not ours to do whatever we want. Our body is not there for us to do whatever we please, because it is not only not ours. It says in chapter 6, verse 15, it says, "Don't you realize that your bodies are actually parts of Christ?" It's not just the temple, it's part of Christ. So whatever you're doing, Christ is doing it with you. We have to understand what we're doing. You have to realize the importance of what you do. Whether it's socially or personally, or like any sins you commit, it's not that God already sees you, He sees you doing it. It's more than that. You're like making Him experience it with you. And that's huge. And if we don't realize that, there's a big problem, right? And he addresses these things, and he talks about, he talks about, where is it? Yeah, he talks about like sacrifice. They start sacrificing for idols and all that, and he tells them you can't be doing this. And I told you the epistles are going to be very blunt, very front, and tell you if you're doing something wrong, you're doing something wrong. That's how he fixes things, and I love that. Because it's no like going around, oh, how do you feel? Oh, is your background? It's like, no, what are you doing? You're doing this. That's terrible. You can't do that. I understand your background is this. I understand you've been told this. I understand that like you have problems. I understand you have work and school. I understand that there's no time for church that you think, but we still have to respect the Sabbath. I understand that all your friends are going out to party. I understand that like social media is like very tempting, and your friends are tempting. So like it's hard. It's easy to fall into that. That's what he says. But you can't do it. He says all of these things, and he tells them you can't do it, because that's what we need. That's the Father we need. Because like a father that says, "Oh, okay, sure," and then it's like every time, like if you have that kind of dad. Don't laugh, Alba. If you have that kind of dad, where he says like, where he's always like, okay, like your mom is not gonna be like, go ask your dad, because your dad has to be firm, right? And the firm, I will kill you every single one of you. I said, so you have to understand, there's no middle ground. Basically, it's like the place between two mountains. There's a quote, I forgot. Like the place between two mountains, no middle ground. Like it's you're either on this mountain or on that mountain. You can't be standing in the middle, right? So, which side are you standing on? Is basically the question. Which side is your faith standing on? Which side is your action standing on? And it's funny because they can be standing on opposite sides. Our faith could be, I love God. I come to church every week. I do this, I do that, and which means their faith is on the right side of the mountain, and then like the things you do aside from the things that are right, which are like exactly on the opposite side, but maybe even higher up the mountain. So like there's levels to it basically. So how far up is your spiritual life in that mountain, and how far down. As the lower here, the higher here is a better way. And even if you get this on this side, it's like both go up. So you have to understand there's no middle ground. There's no middle ground in regards to faith. There's no middle ground in regards to works, right? So that's very important. And like I talked to you guys about, like, you know, the survey I talked about the other week.
Yeah.
Come on, like, you guys make me feel sad. I talked about a survey, how a survey was taken in United States and I think Mexico and Canada. How 90%, 90% of people say they believe in some sort of higher power, right? But we, like, without knowing that fact, if you went out and I just asked you how many percent do you think, I'll give like 43.6. That's high, right? That's how it looks. But so our faith is one and our action is another. So we have to understand to bring that together and push it closer. And I understand people are facing trouble. Like, that's important because, well, the writer is the greatest example, which is Paul, and he was bad. He killed people, right? Regardless if it's with pure heart or not, he killed people. And I don't think anybody here killed anybody. If you have, don't tell me. I don't like that. So if you haven't killed somebody, you're ahead of Paul. To start out, you're starting out ahead of Paul. So you can become better than Paul is what I was trying to say. So kind of to go into briefly 2 Corinthians. At the end of the 1 Corinthians, he tells them that he's going to be coming to visit them. And he ended up not being able to because of different circumstances. And he writes a second one, understanding that there is actually more trouble and more trials and tribulations that they face. And the second one is actually corruption, like I was saying for the first one. And then, so for the second one, people come to teach, right? People started teaching and they say they are better than Paul. They say and like something that's very blasphemous, they say that Christians should not be considered like concerned with morality and holiness, right? They say they shouldn't be concerned with that because of Christ and all that, and that is very false. And Paul even goes to the length and he calls some agents of Satan. And Paul is like, he does not mess around. If you're doing something bad, he's going to tell you. You guys saw in the book of Acts when the guy was Bar Jesus, he told him, you're a devil's follower, and he like, I blind you. And he just like, and he blinds him, right? He does not play around. He's very serious. So if you speak against God, if you're saying something that's wrong, he's going to tell everybody. He's going to tell you what he thinks and what is right. And he blinds that person. And here he calls them agents of Satan, right? So after that, he continues to teach. He continues to affirm the belief of Christ is what's going to save us. The belief of Christ is what's going to save us. And if we go to, excuse me. Okay. It is in I'm in the first one. I was so confused. Alright, so in chapter 6, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, starting from verse 3 until about the end of 10, he gives out, I'm just going to briefly read it. I was planning on going into depth, but I'll try to do that if we have time. It says, we live in such, I'm going to turn this way. We live in such a way that no one will stumble because of us, and no one will find fault with our ministry. It is important because we are epistles. Epistles aren't the only epistles. Epistles are letters to address problems. Epistles are letters to correct wrongness, right? So by that I mean when I say we are epistles, we are letters to others. We are what stands from somebody believing and not believing. If we say we're Christians and we commit sinful acts and people see us doing it, they're like, well, like he's Christian, he's Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox, and if he's doing that, maybe that's not that serious. Maybe they doubt our faith, they doubt our religion because of our actions. But just as important, because of what we do, somebody can be saved. Because of how we act, somebody can be saved. Because of who we invite, somebody can be saved. Just come with me to church. Just if you like, you don't really have to listen, but you listening, just tell them. Like, just asking somebody as simple question as, "What's your belief?" and knowing what their background, knowing what their background is. See, don't make me go. So knowing what their background is very important, because that's what, like, without the backgrounds, these epistles don't mean as much. It feels like Paul is attacking them. But knowing the background is something completely different. So understanding some of your friend's background is going to help you in the long run to understand how to help them and how to bring them closer to God. So quickly, I'm running out of time, but quickly, it says, in everything we do, we show that we are true ministers of God. We patiently endure troubles and hardships and calamities of every kind. Now, this is, he's saying what we have to do. I'll need you guys to pay attention and understand if that's what you're doing or if that's literally the opposite of what you're doing, right? So, you don't have to tell me, just, I know. So, it says, okay, we patiently endure troubles and hardships and calamities of every kind. We have been beaten, been put into prison, faced angry mobs, worked to exhaustion, endured sleepless nights, and gone without food. We prove ourselves by our purity, our understanding, our patience, our kindness, by the Holy Spirit within us. Like, who here has been through sleeplessness, has been going through fasting? Hopefully everybody's starting tomorrow. So all these things is what we have to do. All these things what we have to try to do. And people through this are going to learn. People through this, they're going to understand how to be Christians and come towards God. So, and by our sincere love, we faithfully preach the truth. God's power is working in us. We use the weapons of righteousness in the right hand for attack and the left hand for defense. We serve God. We serve God whether people honor us or despise us. Whatever they slander us or praise, whether they slander us or praise us, we are honest, but they call us imposters. We are ignored, and even through that we are but we are still alive. We have been beaten and we have been killed. Our hearts aches, but we have joy. We are poor, but we give spiritual riches to others. We own nothing, and yet we have everything. So this is very important. If you guys, it's chapter 6, verse 3 through 10. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 3 to 10. And that's what we have to live up to, and it's huge. And kind of to close, there's a verse by someone I really like. I just found it recently. It says, "It is easier to fight for one's principles than to live up to them." It is easier to fight for one's principles than to live up to them. It is easy to go out and say Christianity is the right religion. It is easy to say don't sin. It is easy to say everything I just said. It's easy. It's not that easy. It's pretty hard to make the lessons. But it's easy to fight for what you believe in. But to live up to what you believe in, it's a different level. And I need you guys to stay with me through the rest of the lessons to understand that we have to be able not just fight for our religion, but live up to it. Living up to it is the important part. And with that, if anybody has a question.
I have something to say before the questions.
Yeah.
So one of the main things that we have to remember when we're studying the epistles is that there's a purpose for every book, right? So when we talk about the gospel, within the gospel we find our religion. That's when you're told that without baptism you can't get into the kingdom of heaven. That's when you learn about communion. That's when you learn about Trinity. That's when you learn about incarnation. That's where you learn about resurrection. That's your religion. The book of Acts tells us about history. Revelation gives us hope that we'll rise again when Christ comes. The epistles are specifically written. It has an address. You see, the Gospels are for everyone to read and for everybody to learn about our faith, our religion. When it comes to the epistles, though, it has an address. It's written for a church or a person. And that letter is to address a specific topic, like we've been learning about today. Why is this important? And I'm reiterating everything that Hayao said, because we need to understand that when we read it, I need to ask myself, why did Paul or one of the other disciples or apostles write this letter? Why did they write it? If it doesn't concern me, then I can read it just to say, what did he say to the Romans? But some of it may not be directly related with me. Does that make sense? Not everything that's written in the letter is meant for me. It's meant for the Romans church. Now, if I'm going through the same thing, of course I read it, get something out of it. But if I'm not going through the same things, then it's not for me. And that's very important to understand, because some people read the epistles and think everything in it applies to them. It really doesn't. Number one. Number two, Paul has a very unique and interesting way of writing. When you read the way that Paul writes, if you read just one chapter of the epistle and walk away, you're likely to get the wrong concept. And I'm going to show you what I mean. If you go to Romans chapter 2, verse 29, it says, no, I'm going to read it from 28. It says, for you are not a true Jew just because you were born of a Jew parents or because you've gone through the ceremony of circumcision. No, a true Jew is one whose heart is right with God, and the true circumcision is not merely obeying the letter of the law. Rather, it is a change of heart produced by God's Spirit, and a person with a changed heart seeks praise from God, not from people. So just by reading these two verses, you walk away thinking that the Old Testament is no longer needed, because he's saying, you know what, the circumcision, like following the law of circumcision is not really what you need. So a lot of Protestants, they stop at chapter 2, they show you this verse, and they say, see, the Old Testament is not needed. All you got to do is go to chapter 3, and it says, then what's the advantage of being a Jew? Is there any value in ceremony of circumcision? Yes. You see what he did here? At chapter 2, he's saying the ceremony of circumcision is just by merely obeying it, that's how you go to heaven. And he stops there at chapter 2. And then at chapter 3, and he asks again, so is there value in it? Yes, there is. So in one chapter, it seems like he's attacking it, but in the second, he's defending it. And unless you read the entire chapter and really understand the full concept, you're likely to make a mistake. And that's why our forefathers say, and basically means reading it, just if you're just reading it back and forth, that will cause you to fall. Whereas the exegesis of the Bible will save you. And that's what you gotta consider when you're reading this. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. So any questions?
I didn't catch the division on the First Corinthians.